Speak with Sir Bob Neal, Chair of the Justice Select Committee and Conservative MP. Sir Bob, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Ian.
How can this happen? It's a simple question. Everyone's scratching their head. You just sort of... I don't think we're all built in the 21st century to assume you couldn't possibly any longer escape from a jail.
Well, I mean, escapes have gone down, it's fair to say, over the last 10 years or so, because there has been quite an investment. There's been a lot more technology put in, and that makes it all the more alarming. But of course, the technology is as good as the people who are running the technology. And I think Alex Chalk, to be fair to him, has done the right thing, moved very quickly, said he wants initial answers by the end of the week, so by tomorrow. There's a number of questions that we've got to look at. It looks pretty clear, as you say, with strapping, that there was some pre-planning on this and some assistance. Alex Chalk also told us that the gate was fully manned at the time the vehicle left. Now, there are special procedures that are supposed to be followed. There's a dome which means you can look down on the top of the van to see if there's anybody hiding on the top. The van inside should be searched, and they should run mirrors underneath the van. Now, why wasn't that done? That's the really big question we've got to have there. There's also, as I think was rightly accepted by the Justice Secretary, a need to look about why he was in Wandsworth rather than, say, Belmarsh, and also why, as you've heard, as you just said, why was he in the prison, in the kitchen part of the prison? Because that's usually that's a trusted job. It's regardless.
Yes, you kind of earn your spurs to get in to get in the prison. Yeah, but the idea, Bob, and maybe I'm being slightly naive on this, but the idea that there is any part of a prison that you could conceivably get out of, I think, would be surprising to most of us.
Well, the whole point is you'd expect the perimeter should be secure. Yeah. And that is exactly why there's been this, quite rightly, extra investment in the security at the gate. One of the problems, though, that you've rightly identified in your programme at Wandsworth, and it's not unique to a lot of our old Victorian prisons, is that they're in poor condition, they are overcrowded, and the other problem is that Wandsworth has a real issue with recruiting and retaining experienced staff. Yeah. There's a lot of inexperienced staff in Wandsworth. Now, we'll have to find out, but is that something that may have contributed to this clear error to apply the proper procedures?
There's a sense, Bob, that a lot of our institutions are crumbling at the moment. I mean, quite literally in the case of schools, but lots of areas that just need more than a lick of paint. They need an industrial scale makeover in many respects. They're short of staff. As a consequence, the systems don't work properly. As you rightly say, Wandsworth has a plethora of problems already, from vermin infestations to bullying rates, staff leaving and not being replaced at the right rate, etc. How have we ended up here? How do you think, I mean, outside your brief as the chair of the Justice Select Committee, as a member of Parliament, as a lawyer, as a citizen of this country, what the heck is going on, Bob? I
think, in a sense, it links to what I do as chair of the Justice Committee, but more broadly. Decades, I mean, literally decades, Ian, of underinvestment in our prisons. And a public policy debate which has been all about pushing up tougher sentencing for reasons that one can perhaps sometimes understand, but without realising that that doesn't come on the cheap. That if you can have tougher sentencing and either more people in prison or people in prison for longer, you've got to pay for the cost of housing those people efficiently. Maybe there are some very low-level offenders who we have in prison because they're inadequate, in a sense, rather than a threat. Maybe we need to look about that as part of our public debate as well. But there is a real issue. I used to go to Wandsworth as a young barrister, and it was a pretty grotty prison then. Yeah. We're talking about 30 years ago. Sure. And it has got worse, and we've had repeated inspection reports. Yeah. The other bit that's worth saying is that, of course, the prisons system, like the rest of the Ministry of Justice, isn't protected and hasn't been protected under any government in recent years in budgetary terms. Some, health, education do get special protection in terms of the amount of money that they get. They don't get as large a reduction when times are tough. But at the same time, the prisons actually pick up the downstream end of things that have gone wrong in many cases earlier on in society. Things that have gone wrong in education, in the health service with people with mental health, issues with housing, with drugs, for example, all those issues. but they pick up the cost of where we failed to tackle those earlier on. And that bit of the debate, I think genuinely we as a society need to have a much more honest and a much more holistic, a much more rounded discussion about, and recognise that being safe and punishing people who do wrong doesn't come on the cheap, and that involves consistent investment.
Yeah, and that's it. I guess politically it's not one of those great ones that you shout at the ballot box or at the doorstep, is it? You know, there's not a lot of votes in saying, you know, we're going to plough lots of money into prisons. Well, what about ploughing it into schools and the health service?
Exactly.
I get it, Bob.
Exactly right, Ian.
Listen, always good to talk. Bob Neill, Sir Bob Neill, Chair of the Justice Select Committee and Conservative MP. I mean, he's right on that last point, isn't he? And I think a lot of people would scratch their head and go, hang on, we spend more money putting people who've crossed the channels in boats into hotels than we do on looking after the security in our jails. If you spent time in jail, just talk me through what it's like on the inside in terms of that, certainly the ability to try and escape. I mean, I'm sure lots of people give it a go. Very few people succeed, but I am gobsmacked by how many people succeed. Was it 700 in 10 years have managed to get out in one way or another?